All right, let's go ahead and get this thing started. Thanks for joining us for our town hall. Today we're going to be discussing success sequence bills. We wanted to go over some introductions really quick. My name's Molly Gaines. I'm the co-founder of the Secular Education Association. I am proud to be co-founder with Zachary Parrish. And also we have joining us the amazing Victoria Anderson. She's a dedicated stepmom, a passionate activist, and she is most importantly the state policy specialist for the American Atheists. So thank you for being here, Victoria. We appreciate you. Amanda, also super mom. She is on the new Philadelphia, Ohio school board. She is a dedicated mother of multiple children, an activist, a social worker, and an adjunct professor. So we are very honored to have you with us today as well. Thank you for taking the time to be here and to share your perspectives. I think one thing that we all have in common is parents, right? We are all parents, love our children very much. And so not only will we be bringing our individual specialties, Victoria, the legislative, and Amanda as far as school policy, Zach and I. But we're also going to bring, our individual perspectives as parents as well on this sort of thing that's happening. So again, we appreciate everyone being here with us, and we'll go ahead and get started.
So what the focus today is on is the success sequence bill, and it is a mouthful every time I say it, so I do apologize for that. It does not flow very well coming off the tongue. If you're not familiar with what this is, it's the brainchild of the Heritage Foundation, the extreme right authors behind Project 2025. And what it is a curriculum that pushes the idea that the best way for students to escape poverty is by following this path, which includes graduating high school, getting a full-time job, getting married, and then having children in that order. Those steps in that order is the only way to escape poverty. What they're trying to do in Ohio and in other states, they've already passed this in Utah and Tennessee, and what they're doing is making this a graduation requirement. They're actually trying to make this a whole course as part of the curriculum. In order to graduate, you have to learn this, you have to pass this class. So there's a lot of coded language in the Ohio version of these bills. There are two different ones in the legislature right now. We've got House Bill 269 and Senate Bill 156, the two sister bills that are both about this success sequence. 269 is a lot more detailed. The House version is. The Senate version is very, very short, not very detailed at all, whereas the House version lays out a whole bunch more different things and different details. But this legislation is not very well thought out at all. There's a bunch of issues surrounding it, things like the content. There are questions about the development, how this is going to be put together. There's questions about funding. There's questions about schools discriminating against other programs that don't follow this, implementation, and of course, like data tracking as well, just to name a few of the topics that we're going to be touching on today. So,
Yeah. I think the other important thing to note is that although we are going to be focusing on these specific Ohio bills, they are pretty much carbon copies of each other. Okay. So in every state that we're talking about where it's been passed or proposed or whispered about in hallways or whatever, please know that it's the same thing over and over and over again, whether the wording is the same or not, right? So the ideals, the ideology, the verbiage are all going to be really similar and they're all essentially the same.
because they're coming out of these bill mills, like we see with everything. We have these organizations like the Heritage Foundation, like the ADF, like First Liberty, putting this stuff out and just putting it everywhere all across the country. Molly, do you want to talk about the content a little bit? Should we get into that right off the bat, I suppose?
Sure, we can. All right, one of the big issues here is that they are ignoring huge issues that are faced by students and their families, systemic demographic issues, socioeconomic issues. There's so many different things that are ignored, and saying that the only way to be successful is by marrying and having children is, I don't know. I don't even know how to explain how opposite of the American dream that is because we are all so different. We come from different family structures, we come from different backgrounds, that sort of thing. So not only are we teaching a science, a pseudoscience, let's be clear on that, that is inaccurate, but we are also demoralizing students who are coming from families who are already not, or already outside of that box, of that ideological box. So maybe they have a single parent household, maybe they have two moms at home, that aren't married, maybe whatever it is, right? So we're looking at the content from not only what it is, but also the effect that it could have, right? Both are damaging. There's a lot of nuance and a lot of caveats that the curriculum is going to completely ignore. Let's see here. So they expand HB 269 expands character education requirements, and they sort of talk about, they break out some principles. The one of the principles that stood out to us was respect and care for human life. So on the surface, that doesn't seem like a bad thing, right? It seems like a fine point, no problem. But truthfully, what it is it's a red herring. It is a red herring. It's coded language for pro-life propaganda. That is what that is. And you'll find that statement, respect and care for human life, in some way, shape, or form in every single one of these success sequence bills. So this is part of the curriculum we're concerned that will be almost certainly turned into anti-choice and completely disregard bodily autonomy and regards to abortion as well as gender, amongst many other topics. So that's something that's super concerning. The next one I know that stood out to Zach and I was respect for legitimate authority and law. One of the questions that comes up is, what do you mean by legitimate, right? Should children not be taught to question everything, to be wary of authority? I mean, these are really nuanced and complex subjects that are being presented without any kind of additional information or caveat or instruction on how it should be presented to children. Nothing. So the concern is how this is going to be implemented, and also how it's going to be structured, and also how each individual district is going to present this, because it is going to take on the flavor of their community. And for some of us, that is a horrifying thing. I'm sure you can understand.
I
So
think I think it's just like the other point, a lot of these points on the surface, they seem fine. Like just looking at it, you might think, well, we should respect law and authority. But the only way these laws get changed is by questioning them. We have progressed as a society. Laws change as society progresses. That only happens when questions are raised, when there is pushback against laws that are unjust. The other big part of this for me is, respecting authority. When you put that in the context of sexual abuse, when we're talking about clergy leaders, Boy Scout leaders, teachers, this sexual abuse happens and is covered up in a large part because these people are in authority. These predators will look for authoritative positions so that they can use that to hold it over the children's heads, right? And this is just going to add to that in a very harmful way. That's what scares me about this. Another point that comes up here is respect for patriotism, service for the community, and concern for the common good. Again, great. I want our children to, learn about community service, and I want them all to have a concern for the common good. Respect for patriotism, that's again very coded language. That term has really been kind of bogarted by the right, unfortunately. To me, patriotism is fighting back. It's not just blindly following, you know. Um, so we don't really know what that's going to look like because, again, like Molly was saying, we don't know what this curriculum actually is because it is going to be left to local districts to develop it themselves. That's something we're going to get into here in just a little bit after we go over, what we're talking about contents. Um, but the state is going to develop a model curriculum the districts can follow, but they're also giving these districts the option to develop their own curriculum. So when you just put these random things out there with no real guidelines on how it's going to be developed, it can raise a lot of questions. Respect for religious faith and morality. Is that all religious faiths and morality? That's my first question. I think we know that it probably isn't. You'd like it to be. And what about no faith? Are people without religious faith not to be respected? Am I, as an agnostic or an atheist, not to be respected because I don't have that religious faith? If what we're teaching is that, you need to respect all of these beliefs, What about those who don't have beliefs? Do they not deserve that respect as well? The free thinkers of the world?
Right.
Molly, I'll let you hit the last one.
I was going to say about that one as well. My concern is that so a lot of in a lot of the verbiage they're mixing respect for religious faith, morality, wisdom, and knowledge. And for me, those four things don't belong in the same sentence, not to disrespect faith and morality, but they're all interconnected. Again, these things mean different things to different people. We all hold what our definition is of wisdom, of knowledge, of what we put our respect into, what we let guide our lives. And for that to be intermixed and laid out so simply is so concerning to me, because you're teaching your children your version of wisdom and your version of knowledge and your version of moralities at home, and then they're going to school and being taught whose version. You're sending them to public school not for that, right? Like that is sort of the crux of the issue. Who are they going to come home having wisdom and knowledge about, and who are, whose faith, whose religious faith, what morality, what are we guiding this by? So that's super concerning. The last one that Zach said he'll let me do is one of the ones that concerns me probably the most. I mean, it's hard to pick when everything is so horrifying, but they call for respect for lifelong marriage, sexual fidelity within marriage, and sexual abstinence outside of marriage. I think we all here know the damage that teaching abstinence only sex education can do generationally and to our individual children. I think we also know that there is a huge issue in a lot of religious circles. Let's just go ahead and put everybody in here. The idea that staying within a marriage because that is what your religion um, begs you to do, that's what your religion wants you to do, that is so dangerous. It sets a scary precedent for women and girls to stay, and men, and to stay in abusive relationships that they may not survive, because that is what their religion is dictating to them. And they are instructed to put that religion and that God above all else, even their own safety, even the safety of their children. So I want you to think about what the consequences of that, of teaching that on a large scale is. I mean, we are talking about walking back 50 years, 100 years, whatever, of progress that we've made as far as protecting the women and the girls in our lives. That is one that is has the potential for a lot of damage. And then, we start to talk about um, this leaching into our sex education. We've come so far. We know the science. We know that abstinence only sex education does not work. Let me say it again for everybody in the back. Does not work. And they want to bring it back. And that's what this is at its core. Um, so the problems with it should be self-evident, but it is straight purity culture, right? This is purity culture 101 being forced upon our public school children. I don't know how old you guys are, but we were taught pretty comprehensive sex education in the millennials times. And that is going to be a thing of the past. And that's something that I really can't imagine. So I think that's one that we really need to pay attention to as well, because it has so many um, long-term effects outside of just these children's education and their sex education. These are things that they will carry on the rest of their lives that will affect their entire life and their children's lives. So that's one that's the content really needs to be, looked at and scrutinized.
And again, we took these points out of the Ohio legislation specifically because that's the one that's, most affecting most of the people in our group and, that's currently being pushed through right now. Victoria, do you want to talk about some of the national trends a little bit before we go on?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Zach and Molly. So in 2024, Utah was the first state to introduce and pass legislation promoting the success sequence. I'm having as much difficulty with that tongue twister as Zach is.
Every
Um,
time.
Senator Fillmore, the Senate sponsor for Senate Joint Resolution 3, which was the bill that created Utah's success sequence. Claimed that students who finished high school, obtained full-time employment, and married before having children only had a 3% chance of living in poverty so long as they followed all the steps in order. Failure to adhere to the sequence would increase the chances of students becoming trapped in the cycle of poverty by around 1,000%, according to his testimony before committee. Representative Clancy, the House sponsor, lauded the sequence by saying that many times in the world, the message that we send to our children is that they are a product of their circumstances, that these different hardships and compounding factors can make life tremendously hard, which is true. But in the same vein, we can also assure children that agency is a real thing and that they can influence the outcome of their future. It's not going to be easy, but we can absolutely make it worth it. This pull yourself up by your bootstraps rhetoric won over the Utah legislature, and Senate Joint Resolution 3 was sent to the governor's desk less than 2 months after its first committee hearing. Since then, 5 states, including Ohio, have introduced their own legislation. Mississippi's version, Senate Bill 2536, and Texas's Senate Bill 1742, both died before even receiving a committee hearing. The same was true for Kentucky's House Bill 294. However, this pattern stopped with Tennessee. Tennessee House Bill 178 was signed into law on April 29, 2025. Beginning next year, public school students, some as young as 11 years old, will now be taught the only real path to success is adhering to white Christian nationalist views on morality and family structure. These so-called lessons are going to be taught during health class alongside abstinence-only education. When explaining the bill before the House Education Committee in Tennessee, Representative Bulso echoed the statements made by his Utah counterparts. He said that it has been demonstrated the nuclear family is the best antidote that we have in society to avoiding poverty. He then cited data that he supposedly pulled from the Department of Health and Human Services. And apparently, this data showed that 97% of millennials who followed this sequence did not live in poverty. However, his testimony before the committee and the bill itself misrepresented what the sequence is. Representative Bulso inserted an additional step by saying that kids also need to go to college or learn a trade. This is not what the sequence says. In fact, the sequence actively discourages children from pursuing a post-secondary education. However, this additional step seems to have been the key difference between the Tennessee bill passing, where Texas, Mississippi, and Kentucky all failed. By misrepresenting the steps to the sequence as laid out by the American Enterprise Institute and the Heritage Foundation, the Tennessee bill made shaming and scaring children just palatable enough for the rest of the legislature. To get the bill passed, lawmakers needed to hide the true purpose of the sequence, which is indoctrinating public school students into accepting a white Christian nationalist worldview using taxpayer funding. And we're seeing that again in Ohio. The 2 bills that Zach mentioned, House Bill 269 and Senate Bill 156, are both being considered. The House version accurately lays out every detail of the sequence, including the overtly religious messaging, just like the bills did in Texas, Mississippi, and Kentucky. The Senate version, however, follows Tennessee's lead and obscures the religious purpose of the sequence. This version, like Zach said, is about as bare bones as you can possibly get and includes minimal details about what this sequence actually looks like or why they want it to be in front of students. It appears that Ohio lawmakers are learning from other states' failures. Basically, if you want any hope of getting this kind of indoctrination in front of students, you absolutely cannot be honest about what the curriculum teaches. Even in states where the political climate would otherwise be incredibly favorable to this type of legislation, the success sequence bills routinely fail to even get a committee hearing when the bill sponsors are honest with their constituents and fellow lawmakers about what they want to do. We do need to be honest with students about life-changing decisions, including things like marriage, children, and pursuing an education. I don't think anybody really disagrees with that. However, it's absolutely true that having it is true that having children before you're ready can lead to worse economic outcomes, just as there is a correlation between access to post secondary education and upward mobility. However, that's not what this sequence is about. Lawmakers introducing these bills across the country are seeking to implement a rigid definition of success by which students are meant to measure themselves. And then they are shaming students who fail to live up to this arbitrary standard. Rather than empower students to make informed decisions or give students the tools they need to succeed in life, every iteration of the success sequence legislation would undercut students' chances to pursue a life they find meaningful by removing the critical lessons they need to flourish. And unfortunately, I worry that we're going to be seeing more of this in the coming years, especially if Ohio lawmakers decide to go through with this indoctrination bill.
It's unfortunate to me. It's not only viewing, it's not only teaching the students to view themselves as a failure if they don't follow this, but kind of like we mentioned earlier, they might very well go home and view their own families as not successful if they are coming from these single parent homes, or a parent who doesn't work full time. I do this full time for free and I work part time. Does that make me not successful? Does that make me a failure? It's not something I want my daughter being taught because I don't have a full-time factory job that I'm a failure, right? So thank you, Victoria, for going over through that for us. I know it was a lot of data and numbers. So another big problem that we have with this is how it's going to be developed. Like we mentioned earlier in Ohio, and I don't know, I'm not sure if the other states were the same way. Maybe you can shine some light on this. But in Ohio, the Department of Workforce and Education is going to develop a model that schools can follow, but then they are also going to allow school districts to develop their own course curriculum with a committee that the district selects. Now, this committee can consist of, according to House Bill 269, parents of students enrolled in the districts, educators with experience in teaching character education. Key in on that if you've been paying attention to LifeWise, because this is opening the door for them to put their curriculum into the school day as a graduation requirement. Content deeply rooted in the United States history and tradition. And then the last part of the committee, other members of the community, including community leaders with specific knowledge of fundamental values deeply rooted in the United States history and tradition. So they are literally going to be bringing in these clergy members, these ministers, these business leaders to help them develop how this curriculum is going to be put together. This is all very concerning and very coded language. Everything in this just, screams right-wing revisionist history to me, right? When you're talking about deeply rooted in history and tradition, that just screams revisionist history to me personally. It's going to allow these extreme views to, inject their own biases into our public school curriculum. So that's a big concern for me personally. Amanda, do you want to kind of talk about some of the funding and implementation issues that we're worried about here?
Yeah, I absolutely can. Thank you guys for having me. I just want to let you guys know if you hear something, my daughter is here with me. Most of you know, I think she has disabilities. So if you hear something, it's just her. She's hanging out with me today. But anyways, I wanted to point out too, Victoria touched about how these bills have been introduced in other states. And if you're not familiar, very often you will have legislators, you'll see very similar bills, one introduced in the House and one introduced in the Senate. And that is purposely done. And the reason being is because if they can't get one to pass in the House, then they have it introduced as a Senate as well. And oftentimes, like you'll see the ones in Ohio, one is very detailed. If they can't get that one through because it does explain more, there's more information there, then to them that says we're more likely be able to get the one that doesn't have as much language pushed through. So it's very calculated, it's very strategic. They specifically do it this way because if they can't get one passed, they hope to get the other one passed. But as far as how this would be implemented, from a school perspective, this legislation, if it were to pass, requires school boards to organize a committee, like Zach was talking about, of parents, other members in the community, whether they hold professional titles or not, to develop a curriculum to be implemented as a graduation requirement for students. This curriculum also has to be approved by the state. So it would be a matter of time and resources to pull together this kind of committee. And like I said, it would look very different depending on what community you came from or you live in. But most concerningly, um, for me, as an individual school board member, what I would be concerned, and let me be very clear, I'm not speaking for my Board of Education, I'm speaking as an individual. However, this legislation also requires that data be submitted to the state that looks at academic achievement, but also looks at disciplinary actions. That information is already sent to the state. However, the state would then take that information and it would develop the reasoning using that information on whether or not this success sequence is effectively working for students, right? Why is that a problem? It doesn't take into account at all students' socioeconomic status, any identified disabilities, or any students with unidentified disabilities. On top of that, school districts would be required to put on their website the results that the state determined whether or not this was a success or not. So it would be false data, right? It would legally require school districts to put misinformation on our websites for parents to entice them essentially to buy into this process of the success sequence. And like Molly mentioned, not only am I a school board member and a professor, but I'm also a mom. So I'm kind of momming right now, guys. So bear with me.
I mean, speaking of
One of
that false data, do you want to talk about those statistics real quick, Victoria, and how like the data that they're using for this is false?
Yeah, absolutely. So, proponents of the success sequence cite a variety of studies and statistics to back up their claims that this curriculum teaches students the life skills they need. The most common claim that 97% of millennials who followed the sequence are, quote, not poor, comes from a 2022 report published by the American Enterprise Institute, which is a center right think tank founded in 1943 and dedicated to promoting free market capitalism. This report, titled The Power of the Success Sequence for Disadvantaged Youth, claims that data from a study conducted by the Bureau of Labor Statistics proves the effectiveness of the sequence, where 97% of millennials born between 1980 and 1984 who followed the sequence were not poor by the time they reached their mid 30s. And if the report's to be believed, the effectiveness of the curriculum is apparently steady across all socioeconomic backgrounds, and also proves that post secondary education is not tied to long term economic stability. However, there are a bunch of issues with this report, and they really cast doubt on its accuracy. For one, the report fails to define what it means to not be poor. Even though this is the main criteria upon which they build the entire report, it fails to state how this is measured. Does it mean a low debt to income ratio? Were participants earning a living wage, and were they able to save up for retirement? What about, or, emergencies? Does not being poor refer to assets, or does it mean that people in the study had significant cash reserves? It really could mean honestly anything. And that makes it absolutely impossible to disprove the report because it is meaningless. If you look up the actual reports published by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, nothing within the report published by the American Enterprise Institute actually stands up to scrutiny. Thousands of full-time workers fall below the poverty line due to low wages, high cost of living, and other factors outside individuals' control. The Sussex sequence claims that simply graduating high school is sufficient to guarantee a successful life. But people with only a high school diploma are twice as likely to live in poverty compared to those who attended some college or received an associate's degree, and three times more likely to live in poverty compared to those who had at least a bachelor's degree. Marriage is also not a determining factor in whether a person is financially stable, as the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that there is no statistically significant difference between the number of married people living in poverty compared to single individuals living by themselves or with non family members. Proponents of the sequence also claim that the curriculum will fix the plummeting birth rates in the United States, improve young people's mental health, and help students avoid becoming entangled with the criminal justice system. Much like with the report, these arguments absolutely don't hold water. The birth rate in the United States has indeed reached a historic low, according to the CDC, but that has nothing to do with whether students are being taught the sequence. It has everything to do, though, with the cost of housing increasing faster than wages or salaries, medical care becoming more and more out of reach for the average American with each passing day, and millions of families paying more than 20% of their gross income on daycare and after school programs, along with the cost of everyday goods and services soaring. These are just like some of the factors leading Americans to choose not to have children. And none of these would be fixed by simply telling young people to graduate high school, get a job, and get married. The same is true for our nation's mental health crisis and incarceration rates. There are These are all unbelievably complex issues that don't have a one size fits all solution, like the ones offered by House Bill 269 and Senate Bill 156. I honestly think that the reason these claims are being pushed is because it's way easier to blame individuals for their living conditions because they failed to adhere to some arbitrary standard than it is to actually take a critical lens on and point it towards the long-standing systemic issues that have plagued our country for generations.
So we're building this up on BS statistics and reports, and we're making the schools implement this. Um, the other thing that really strikes me is the funding aspect of it, right? Um, this is going to have to be something that we're going to need additional teachers to teach, or we were just going to have the health teachers teach it, like you said they did in Utah. There's not really anything laid out about that in these bills of how that's going to happen, right, Amanda? Isn't that part of your concern too, is the funding?
Right. So nothing in these bills tells us who is certified to teach this kind of course, because this isn't a typical course, right? So as school districts, we hire teachers based on their credentials, right? What they have been taught to teach. Where does this fit? This isn't a health class. This isn't English language arts. This isn't social studies, right? So it doesn't just describe any kind of credentials somebody would need to teach this. Okay. The other issue is nowhere does it say, does this have to be a full year curriculum? Is this a half a year curriculum? Does this have to be implemented in other class, like part of your health class? Is this implemented in part of your social studies class? So there's no guidance on any of that. Also, if teachers are having to pick up another class to teach, right? That's outside of their contract hours. So now we're having to go back and ask teachers to teach something outside of their contract, or we're having to change contracts. That's costing money. But guess where that money is not coming from? It's not coming from the state. This is another unfunded mandate from the state. Let me make that perfectly clear. Um, my district alone, House District 51, which is all of Tuscarawas County and a little bit of Stark County, Ohio, is being underfunded $36.5 million in this next budget. So not only are they underfunding schools, now they're doing more unfunded mandates for the school. Big problem in the bill, which the House bill outlines, I don't believe the Senate bill does, it outlines that school districts can take donations from any outside entity to pay for the implementation of this course. Now, why is that a problem? Because that would allow for religious entities to pay school districts to implement their curriculum. Because they would then, we all know how this goes, whoever is the donor gets a say, because remember, school districts will be required to have a committee of community members, which if you were donating to implement this, it is probably likely that you would be sitting on the committee to develop this curriculum. The other problem is school districts would also have to have a policy that says we would not be able to take any kind of funding from an individual, an organization, or an agency that views may oppose this type of curriculum.
And that goes farther than taking the money too. And that, that's just a little caveat on the money part, but that point that, anybody who opposes this or teaches anything different outside of this success sequence, they can deny approval to any group proposing any kind of instruction or any after school club, anything like that. They can deny approval to these groups that don't line up with this success sequence and this character education. Now let's expand that. This could effectively shut down any LGBTQ plus groups, any affirming, after school programs. This could even go as far as shutting down GED programs because they want you to graduate high school, right? Abortion education. Like this could go so far. It could stretch so far to deny any group that just doesn't align with this direct thing. And again, we're talking after school groups or lesson plans or money.
In the House bill does actually have language that there's a lot more mandates in that one. There's requirements for other courses that the district would have to mandate American history courses before any kind of courses that talked about any kind of international or global history or issues. It also would require us to open our doors for after school programs, to use our facilities, but that school districts would also be able to deny that kind of access to any kind of group that didn't align with the board's political or religious views. If you're unaware, school boards are nonpartisan. It is supposed to be that way because public education is neither supposed to be political or religious. So having districts and requiring districts to open their doors to and provide a space and pay for the cost of utilizing that space, but then also saying, but depending on whether your board's ideology falls this way religiously or that way politically, you can deny access to other organizations. It's very problematic. It's extremely problematic. There are so many issues when it would come to, if this were to become law, implementing this. Again, like I mentioned, it's unfunded. School districts would be required to produce that funding. If they can't produce that funding for this, school districts would have to go to the highest bidder. Essentially, we're required by law to fund this. We're not getting any funding. Who do you think the groups will be that are going to be offering up the money to fund this, right? Essentially opening the door. Um, this blurs the line between separation of church and state. Separate myself as a school board member. My personal belief is this is very intentional. This is very intentional. We are seeing a lot of legislation lately that is opening that door and will blur that line. My personal belief is it is in the hopes to bring religion into public education, and ultimately we will see a privatized system of education in this state. But again, back to the policy pieces, the implementation pieces, this would be an absolute nightmare to implement at for a school board or at the school level. There's no guidance. Like I said, essentially, community members with no credentials would be developing this curriculum that is required for students to graduate high school.
In middle school too, right? I mean, this starts at either
7th through 12th grade.
sixth or
7th through 12th
seventh,
grade.
depending on which bill it is. I think one bill
Yeah.
says sixth grade and one bill says seventh grade.
Yes, yes. Senate bill is 6th, House bill is 7th grade. The House bill also has American history requirements before a student can go from 8th grade to 9th grade, which is different than the requirements now, along with other education, mandated education in areas of sexual abuse prevention and violence, dating violence. And now we can all agree that kind of education and awareness is needed and should be, right? However, the language in the bill is very subjective about who can teach that stuff, and in fact says that if any organization, individual, you cannot provide information to students for any organizations or individuals that provide all care, which would include all care education, which would include abortion or abortion related services. So essentially saying you can't tell students that if you are a victim of sexual assault or rape, you can't tell them to go to your local emergency room to have an examination done because your local emergency rooms provide abortion related care. That's a problem. That's a huge problem. It also says that you have to promote the idea and you have to develop education and curriculum. And as part of a requirement, I don't remember if it says you have to have at least an hour of this education. If it was like per semester or a year on the importance of being an organ donor. Which, just full disclosure, I'm an organ donor. That's fine. But that is a decision as an adult that I should be making. I don't know as a parent that I would be having that conversation with my 6th grader who is 11 years old. It also opens the door. We all saw the most recent case where there was a woman who was in a coma, who was kept on life support, even though she was brain dead, to develop a baby. I don't know that schools should be the ones promoting curriculum or an education on why that promotes why people should be organ donors. I just don't know that it's a public school space to do that. I see the importance. I very much see the importance. I don't believe that that should be.
It also goes against some religious denominations. I mean, that's a key point too.
It's inappropriate because not everyone is even allowed to be an organ donor by their religious doctrine. Even if they wanted to be, that's something that they're not allowed to do. So then you've got automatically someone who's less than, right? Because they can't conform to that part of the success sequence, or they can't conform to that part of the teaching. it's a very personal decision about being an organ donor or not, and one that I don't think anyone who's not an adult is equipped to even make or think about. Like, I agree. I think that that's so far outside of the important things we need to be teaching our children that I don't understand where that even comes into
Yeah.
things. And
I saw, oh, I'm sorry, Mom. I
no,
was going to say, I saw Bella commented that, parents are allowed to opt out if there's a particular book or something, or a piece of curriculum, but this will be a mandated requirement. So students will not be able to opt out of this curriculum. It'll be a mandated requirement for graduation.
You can't teach an alternative if the alternative doesn't align with this, morality and
right,
this
right.
strict sequence.
The alternative
So
will be automatically shut down. They won't allow it because it is challenging that ideology. I do also want people to think about, like, when Amanda was talking about the funding and being able to accept private funds in order to teach this curriculum in schools. I want you to think about the sort of people in your town who would fund that. We're talking about Lifewise Academy. We are talking about your local mega church. We are talking about the zealots in your town. We are talking about those who wish to see us as a Christian nation or who wish to see public education destroyed. That is who is going to fund this curriculum. And the schools will be forced to take that money because they are mandated to teach the curriculum, but not giving any money to do so. So it is really a catch-22. I mean, they are purposefully, as Amanda said, and I agree 100%, they are purposefully backing us up against a wall and forcing us to comply with their idea of morality, of religion, of wisdom, of knowledge. That is what they're doing. And they're doing it by getting to our children first.
and I think the last point that we really want to touch on before we kind of close up and go over our personal perspectives on this is the oversight and the data tracking and the reporting aspect of this, which again, this seems like an administrative nightmare from a school perspective. Um, these bills put a burden on the schools and expands government overreach with these data reporting requirements. These bills mandate that districts must report the impact of the success sequence and character education curriculum on student discipline and academic achievement. What are the metrics for that? How can you even possibly measure that? They also want the school districts to report other data relating to it considered appropriate for inclusion. So they just want all of the data about these curriculums and these courses and this character education. They want all of this data to be reported back up to the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce. And then they, in turn, are required to maintain a list of all the different districts' curriculum, all the different policies that these individual districts have put into place. ODU must maintain a list of those, what they're teaching in that district, and then make their own reports to the governor, lieutenant governor, speakers of the House, and chairpersons of the committees regarding education. Again, the Conservative Party is supposed to be one of small government. But when I see stuff like this, it just seems like they are pulling this control away from local governments. And it frustrates me. Again, there's no real metrics for how this information is going to be gathered or collected or correlated. Like,
So what essentially they're saying is, I mean, truthfully, I want you to think about it. What they are saying is, we want to hear that this works, and we want you to lie to us to show us that it works. Because if there is no metrics, if there is no science, then there is no way to calculate that, right? So that is what they're asking for, is lies. They just want to hear what they want to hear. And I mean, we all know what's going to happen if a school reports. I mean, I guess Amanda might be able to tell us, or even Zach, I'm not sure. What happens if a school just outright says this isn't working? I mean, what is their, like, what do they do in that case? There is nothing usually, right? They would be, you're on mute. I do it all the time.
Sorry, you wouldn't know. So essentially, the academic achievement data already goes to the state,
Right,
and the discipline data already
right.
goes to the state, right? And the state would determine whether or not they are seeing trends. However, typically, what would affect the achievement, the academic achievement rates and the disciplinary rates are hands down whether or not students have been identified as having a disability or not. Um, that's what mostly affects our achievement rates, our academic achievement, and our disciplinary rates. And also, those things, those numbers, when they go to the state, they don't take into account that they don't take into account a student's socioeconomic status, whether or not they are in a school district that, we're looking at rural, we're looking at urban, we're looking at suburban school districts. The numbers will be different because depending on where you're located, and then the Department of Education and Workforce would determine whether or not the numbers that they are seeing is because the success sequence is helping academic achievement or disciplinary actions. That information, you would not know that.
You'd never
You
know.
would not know that information just from the information that is going to the state. You wouldn't know that. You would not know whether or not the success sequence works because you can't follow students after they graduate, right? So there isn't a tracking mechanism to show whether or not that this works. The data that they want
It's
is
not
data they already get that is not going to be able to be you're not going to be able to come up with actual conclusions onto whether or not this works or not, but they're going to require districts to put what they have determined on their social or on their website, saying that it's is required to be put on the website where the public has easy access to see. So essentially, like I said before, forcing a school district to put misinformation
Mhm.
on their public website. So there's no tracking ability here when it comes to that.
And I think, I mean, I don't even think we all need to go over this, but we talked about in the beginning, the American dream is something that is doesn't fit into a box, right? Of the four of us here on this screen that are on video, raise your hand if you followed the success sequence. Exactly. And I admire everybody on this video call that I can see and who I can't see. But I know you four very well and I admire you greatly. So I think that's just
I'm a high school dropout,
that's an
just for
example.
clarity.
Exactly. Like Zach has a criminal record from being young. I did not go to college. Like these are not the make or break it, right? That is what's awesome about our country. And that is something that they are trying to systematically take away chunk by chunk, right? Is our ability to be individuals, our individuality and our you know, I really think that what it comes down to is they're trying to dumb down the population and along with that damage self-esteem because that keeps workers working and that keeps poor people poor and that keeps uneducated people uneducated and it really ultimately gets them what they want. So that's my opinion. That's why I think that we have to fight back and push back as hard as we can. And like Victoria said, we are going to see success sequence bills coming out of the woodwork in the next 2 years, 3 years, whatever. Watch. State after state after state is going to try over and over and over again to implement these because it really is just Christian nationalism thinly veiled in patriotism.
We've kind of talked about this from our perspectives as activists and, school policy and state policy director. But like we said earlier, we are all parents up here. And, that is the most concerning of all of it. Like, don't you dare teach my daughter to just blindly respect authority. Like, I want her to question everything. I want her
Don't
to
you?
question me. I want her to question her teachers.
Yep.
Um,
Don't you dare teach our children that they have to get married to be successful. What? I'm sorry, what? a lot of us would be more successful if we had never gotten married.
Yeah.
I mean, that is one of the
You're losing
lessons
half
that,
in the divorce. Let's be
yeah,
real,
like
right?
that's just one of the things that you learn with age, right? But to teach such blatant incorrect information at such a malleable age is, I mean, this will hurt so many generations of Americans, just based on the fact that it will shame them and it gives them the misinformation, right?
So, you know, we aren't hopeless here. I think there is stuff that we can do, hopefully. Um, we are going to, like I said, we're going to put out a follow-up email. Victoria, I believe you guys are going to try to put out a call to action for us, right? And then Molly and I are also working on some social media posts, that type of thing, just to help you spread and raise awareness. Victoria, do you want to talk a little bit about what the call to action, what that system and that process will look like when we do get it out for them?
Yeah, so at American Atheists, we have something that we call action alerts, where if we see something that's going on in Ohio, we will send out an email saying what the bill is, when it's being heard, whether it's a committee hearing or being heard on the floor or what have you. And we'll provide you with a letter template that you can use to contact your representatives or state senators. And I would highly encourage you, if you're not already, to please sign up for those. We have done the numbers at American Atheists, and we take a critical look at what affects whether a bill passes or whether it dies before it even gets a chance. And the biggest thing is whether people turn up, whether people contact their lawmakers, whether people show that they care about this issue. Because ultimately, when it comes to legislation like this, what lawmakers want is for it to fly under the radar. They want it to be affecting you before you even have a chance to voice your opinion on it. So if you sign up with us, we'll alert you about things that are happening and we'll give you that opportunity to show up. And we will assist you every step of the way to get a letter to your lawmaker about why bills like HB 269 and SB 156 are not what the families of Ohio want.
Yep. And, like always, the biggest thing for our organization really is just spreading awareness about these issues. We recorded this, we'll get it up on our YouTube, so you'll be able to share this video. Just be active on your social media, get the word out there, talk to your friends. Join both of our email lists, donate to us. We're happy to open it up to any questions. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat there. You can hop on camera and ask them whatever you'd like to do. If you want to just join in the discussion, we'll leave it open for a few more minutes for anybody that has anything they want to add or talk about.
Thanks for coming. We appreciate you guys being here with us in the middle of the afternoon. This is very important information, that if you don't know, you don't know, and I know that sounds really cliche, but it's true. And when you hear these things and you hear success sequence, we want you to know what they're trying to do, what is the wool they're trying to pull over your eyes, right? And that is one part that we all can do, is to spread that awareness so that they do not succeed in, like Victoria said, sneaking this in under our radar and making it seem innocent when really it is anything but. Thanks, guys. We appreciate you. You can always, if you think of a question later and you're not here and there's no meeting, you can always send us an email, contact@seculareducationassociation.org. Victoria, I'm sure the atheists have a contact page. Do you know it offhand, so that if anyone has a question for you guys, it's www.atheist.org/contact. So you can get in contact with them directly if you have a question for them that you think they'd be better suited to answer. We always encourage to join across our organizations, because we are simply working together and holding each other up, because we have no other choice, right? We have to work together, all of us.
I just want to say thank you personally to Amanda and Victoria for joining on this with us. I really appreciate it too. So,
Thanks, guys.
I know you guys are
Seriously.
busy.
Yeah.
And thank you so
Of
much for
course.
having me.
Thank you.
Invaluable friends and allies in the both of you.